Had a school shooting in Georgia.
Thank you.
And the school shooter ostensibly attacked that school because he didn't feel trans rights were being respected. This is a serious topic.
It is.
What we're teaching our kids about themselves and about who they are. But it has gotten to the point now where we've had 2 school shootings over an ideology and an indoctrination of our kids into thinking there's something wrong with them.
They were born in the wrong body.
But who's making them feel that way?
Where children are being
We're
told in public
telling
school
them-
classrooms that they were born
we're
in the wrong
telling them.
body. Do you know that Jazz, a little boy, had his penis split open and inverted, sterilized, never have an orgasm, has to stick a dilator in to keep an open wound open? This is a child. When I was 12 years old, I didn't know that I wanted to be a mom. If you had said to me, you know, when I got my period, I have yet to meet a young girl who loves going through puberty. I didn't know that I want to breastfeed my children. And I had to listen to Chloe Cole, a detransitioner, sit on a stage where she said, don't know if I will ever be able to have a baby. And if I have children, I won't be able to breastfeed. And what I say to you, Ben, is this. These gender ideologues are stealing a future from girls that they don't even know that they want.
And
yet.
boys.
These are
And
children.
boys, yeah.
But right now, I'll talk about ROGD and girls, and you're right, boys too.
This is how it's happening, actually, Ben, is they're coming into media centers and libraries like we're at.
That's right.
And they're bringing adults in to read this material, and these young children are believing what's read because it's in a book.
They also believe in Santa, just to be clear.
Before this book was read, did we have trans people in the
There's
world?
no such thing as a transgender child.
Before this book was read, did we have gay people?
There's no such thing
Before
as a
any of
transgender
this,
child.
so in my mind, I do know
And
that
I think they're actually trans.
I'm just curious.
The majority
They
of young
wouldn't
boys and
exist
girls,
if we didn't
especially
read
There was
boys.
transsexual, they changed it to transgender.
I mean,
that's part of the whole idea. No, they're different things.
Right. Okay, my point
We
is.
got to get to the
okay.
ideology behind this if we really want to discuss it.
Transgender ideology is extremely homophobic. The majority of boys who end up going through transition or pushing a transition, if left alone to go through puberty, would turn out to be gay.
Have you heard this before?
Never. What I have heard is that the suicide attempts and the suicide rate for boys who feel like they are,
and I wonder if they
who do not
felt
have the
seen
support.
and heard, it would be
I know,
different.
and I understand transgender. I'm sorry, you are absolutely right. Transgender, where you actually transition. I don't know how comfortable I am with really agreeing with that. But when it comes to a child who feels like they're something else and being able to kind of like wear a dress or wear heels or whatever it is, I'm not going to like.
But this is what's interesting.
Like I don't have I'm not even a part of that community for me to really have an opinion on it, to be really quite honest. But for the students who feel like they are.
Well, neither of us, we all have opinions.
They would rather die than be, you know what I mean? Because nobody is giving them a place to be seen or to be respected. That to me is a problem as well.
But the data shows
if we're going to care about all the students, then we need to care about all the students.
We don't need to be having conversations about surgeries and puberty blockers and whatever. First off, the percentage is very, very low, right? Very low. You're talking 1%, maybe.
Skyrocketing. You have schools in California where they have.
I'm sorry, I was right in the middle of a sentence. Thank you. So I think the conversation with the place that school psychologists the role that they play, the role that the larger school family plays, the conversation should be much more centered on how do we support the child and the family as they navigate this very complicated landscape.
What is the message you think that a child who does not conform to gender stereotypes gets from this book?
So you have a child that's experiencing mental distress. First of all, it's being introduced now in kindergarten. These are children who really, and it is being mandated in some states that this is taught.
Actually, is that in your experience? Have you seen this being in kindergarten? Do kids talk about gender?
I think that, I'll be really transparent. I think that if a child is already in a classroom that already has this mindset that this is who they are, then of course it's going to come up in conversation between kindergartners. Yes. Because the child is coming to school, we're in a public education system, we're going to have different kids that come to school. So
as opposed to like it being introduced as curriculum.
I mean, we are in Florida, man.
Yeah,
so no, absolutely not.
Right. But it will happen.
Definitely not. But by middle school, absolutely, because there's going to be kids there that are trans. I'm so sorry, even the terminology.
In our schools and public education, our kids aren't even learning how to read. And we're telling them they've been born in the wrong body. There are 2 sexes, 0 genders, and infinite personalities. Telling children there's something wrong with them because they like to play with different toys or like the color pink is abuse.
So she is definitely the strongest out of the 3 people on the side of sanity and not grooming children in this debate, because she doesn't just try and be nice the whole time to her opponents. She treats them with the kind of scorn and contempt that they should be treated with, because this is not a debate about a trivial political matter. It's not about economics. This is about not grooming little children in schools. They are on the side of evil and insanity and should be treated as such. This book that they're talking about, I Am Jazz, is about a little boy who thinks he's a girl, and it's this wonderful experience for this little boy transitioning into the girl. Such a happy story. So great. Wow. Child transitioning. This is Indoctrination 101. This is meant to confuse the malleable brain of a child into believing that this sort of mental illness is not only acceptable, but it's a good thing. It's a happy thing. It should be encouraged. It should be aspirational. And if you do this, you're also brave like the little kid in the story. This is absolutely scandalous and should be fought with everything we have. Because the indoctrination of children in schools like this is not something that happens by chance. This has been a slow build-up over the past 60 years or so, where the cultural Marxist left has captured our institutions in the West. And it does not end with this. The logical conclusion of this ideology upon children is extremely dark and concerning. And this coordinated subversion is designed to create generations of ideologues to come. This is very serious. Children are being used as ideological weapons by these sick freaks. And if not stopped, it will go all the way to its logical conclusion. We will end up seeing schools doing away with biology altogether.
Gender-neutral uniforms, plus bathrooms and pronouns according to the students' choosing. Arlington Public Schools has a new set of rules as it heads back to school.
And eventually, we will end up seeing the normalization of pedos. Because if children can consent to reading these sick books, and if they can consent to doing whatever they want with their body because they know better than their parents, then just use your imagination as to what else it leads to. So on to the next part now, where anybody who is normal and not a freak listening to this will understand that it comes crumbling down for these leftists, because they bring up a book that Tiffany happens to actually be very familiar with. Also, watch how outrageously biased the moderator is here.
These things are just inflammatory, like bright, shiny objects.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Tiffany, I swear.
What? I'm sorry.
Then let me say it for her. No, you're wrong.
Okay.
You're absolutely wrong.
Listen.
Well, where have we seen?
Listen to me.
Sorry.
We have a system that's built on seat time. We've had 50 years of unfunded mandates. We have not added 1 minute to the school day, not 1 day to the school year. Right? Those are the things that we can control. We cannot control how somebody views their body.
Yes.
That's not what we can control. What we can control is the policy that surrounds education and how we deliver it to our children.
And we're not
That's
talking
what
about,
we're here to
We're
talk
not talking about controlling how they feel about themselves or how they think.
That's
I don't
not what
know.
she's talking about, though.
But she just said that.
No.
She just said it.
She's not talking about controlling the feelings of students.
She said
She's
we cannot
talking
control
about-
the feelings.
We
We're
can't
not
control-
asking.
we can't-
We're not
We can
trying to
control
do
what we
that.
spend time on in the classroom, and spending time on I Am Jazz when we only have one-third of
talking
American
about right
children-
here, sitting
when we
here
only
right
have
now.
one-
We have to move on to this book stuff. So, House Bill 1069, signed into law last year in Florida, among other things, establishes a process for parents to object to any school library book and requires the books be immediately reviewed or immediately removed while these objections are adjudicated. Now, Tiffany, because I know this is something that's been pushed by Moms for Liberty.
No.
Well, then clear this up. Do you think that Florida's law, or the law that I just described, which is Florida's law, is this a good model for the rest of the country?
I think that the biggest concern really has been in Florida and other places that there didn't seem to be a process for school as to how library books, were making their way into the library, how they were being reviewed. And so I sat on a school board for 4 years. Were there books that were in the library that weren't appropriate for public school while I was on the school board? Absolutely. I think that there were books that librarians, in some cases, were shocked to see what the content was in the library books. So I think that, you have curriculum that is adopted in every school district. Parents are involved in as part of that curriculum adoption process, and that parents should absolutely have the ability to look at what the books and the materials that are in the schools, and if they have concerns about them, to go to their local school board, their elected officials, and express their concerns.
Okay, so is this law which says that if a parent objects to a book, that the book is immediately removed while it is reviewed? And I mean, is that? Do you feel? Do you
Yeah, I
stand
think
behind
there
this
has to
policy?
be a process that's in place in order for materials to be questioned and the school board to be able to take action on that. And I just want to be clear. The mission of Moms for Liberty is to unify, educate, and empower parents to defend their parental rights at all levels of government. We're a parental rights organization. The book issue was something that we didn't start, but was actually brought to a lot of our moms and they were made aware of. And I do feel that parents felt they had a moral obligation to take action when they saw the graphic sexual content that was in these books.
Okay, so this bill has resulted in the removal of hundreds of books from library shelves. This includes books by Toni Morrison, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
To be clear, the school boards are the ones that are making the decision about which books are removed.
No. This law says that if a parent objects to a book, it's whisked off the shelf.
The school board is the one that makes the decision, and Ryan was a part.
Ultimately about whether we put the book back on the shelf.
Correct.
But,
take it away.
Or the superintendent.
I mean, parents are going to ask. Here's the thing: parents. I mean, even on the school board, you spent 24 years. Parents are going to ask a lot of questions. Some of them are going to be, things that you want flagged that you're aware of. Some of the things that parents are going to bring up, you're going to say either maybe there's nothing I can do about that, or that this is something that's a policy in our district and we're going to continue doing it. But parents have the right to ask questions about anything that their children are being exposed to in schools, and local school boards are elected. That's why American public education is so beautiful in many ways, because across the world, parents don't have the type of representative government that we do in America. Local control is incredibly important.
Okay, but this law has resulted in the removal of books that I don't think any of us would call pornographic, books by Judy Blume, Jodi Picoult, Margaret Atwood. So my question is for everyone, is this law too broad?
I think it's very important to be honest about the fact that when we talk about funding and school library funding, it's minuscule. And that's something that I know that Ryan has spoken about publicly, about the fact that we should be investing in our libraries, in our schools, and we should be investing in literacy specialists to help our children to identify good books that are going to help to enhance their learning. We have standards in American public education. In Florida, we have the best standards. It's a roadmap that shows very clearly what a child should be learning in any given year. And then there's curriculum that's selected in the school that matches to those standards. And so the idea that every book that has ever been written should be in a public school library is just ridiculous. Jodi Picoult, as you spoke about, well, that's a book that you can buy in the grocery store while you're checking out your groceries. Should a book that you buy at the grocery store that's a female romance novel, should taxpayer money be spent on that book and put on a library shelf? I think it's a good debate to have.
I don't see anything wrong with parents reviewing the materials that are part of the curriculum.
But it's also what parents. So it's very selective. It's very selective. I'll give you an example. We had a situation in our district about one particular book, All Boys Aren't Blue. And it's a story about a young African.
There's a boy in the book.
Okay, keep going.
He's a minor.
I just said that.
Oh, okay.
Wait a minute.
American boy, man.
Gotcha, bitch.
A young boy, it's kind of his coming of age, right? He loses his virginity when he's in college, later in life. He was molested by his cousin when he was younger, I think 12 or something like that.
He was anally raped by an adult family member.
Okay,
Tiffany,
and this is something.
And this happens.
So keep going.
And so I read the book from cover to cover because we had a school board member that actually filed criminal charges against our superintendent and wanted the superintendent arrested. Ridiculous, right? When I say it's up to certain parents, if I am an African American mother of a young gay man, I don't have a problem with him reading this book.
Oh my gosh.
Excuse me, molestation happens.
We should do a lot better than throw a library book on the shelf.
And let me tell you something.
Is this not the point?
Judy Blume's Forever is raunchier than that book.
Well, Judy Blume's been pulled from shelves too.
I know, right? And we're of that. Some of us are of that generation of Judy Blume. But Forever was a pretty naughty book.
I mean, these are books that describe the reality of teenage sexuality, and that is a thing that makes some parents very uncomfortable.
And I'm just saying that if parents want to opt out, right, Tiffany, if you don't want your child to read that book, then we have a process in Florida where the parents can opt out of that book.
Does the parent have to name the books that are not?
Yes.
So I
but
guess
now,
can we
if
tweak
I'm
this?
a parent and I want my child to read that book, I should have a right to let my child
is this not
read
kind of
that
the
book.
way out of this that sort of satisfies people feel very passionately about this on both sides. Could you not have a system where a parent can say, hey, every book that my kid checks out of the library, it has to have my approval?
Why don't we
That'd be
just
sort of the fastest way to sort of resolve this problem and move
it's
on?
more or less like that.
Would you like me to? Maybe we could just take all of the books that have graphic sexual content. Now, I'm going to push back on you for a moment because you said this is normal, children having coming of age sexual experiences. It's not normal.
He didn't lose his virginity until he was in college.
I'm sorry. Being anally by your adult family member is losing your virginity.
Okay.
Being anally by your adult family member is not normal childhood sexual experience.
I'm sorry,
and
who
I think
said
it's
it
insulting.
was?
And I think it's insulting to say that any black parent with a gay child would be okay with their child reading that book.
You're being absolutely ridiculous and you're putting words in my mouth. That is not what I said.
Wait a minute.
If I am an African-American mother of a young gay man, I don't have a problem with him reading this book.
Yes.
Always lying to me. You're lying so much.
So
I think your point was that a book that
Don't
speaks to a
choose.
certain...
why don't we
Right.
put all of the books with graphic sexual content that are in the libraries behind like a curtain, like a special area? And then if parents want their children to be exposed to graphic sexual content,
Porno
they can
site.
go into the raunchy naughty room, as she shared.
I know you're being
Is that a good idea?
Well, I know you're being facetious here, but I guarantee you that if you did something like that,
shows
the
that
kids
we are,
would
like,
all
very
flock to
That's
the
right.
dining
They'd
session.
all flock to it.
And also, this is
half
what has
of the books
happened,
the kids never even knew about.
Now you
Only
have-
a third of children in American
wait, hold
public
on.
schools can read on grade level. They can't even read.
Yeah, what's the problem, Tiffany? They can't read them anyway.
So hilarious there. All the girls just having a laugh about it. Kids should be reading these pornographic books. Ha ha ha. Isn't it just hilarious? Ha ha ha. Well, no. I have had the immense displeasure of reading some excerpts from this book, Not All Boys Are Blue, in the research to this video, and it is extremely graphic. As in like gay adult film sort of graphic, but involving minors. And after reading it, I genuinely felt like I needed to have a shower. In fact, it's so graphic that I couldn't read it here because I'm almost certain that YouTube would demonetize this video. Plus, it would also just be extremely uncomfortable and weird for me to do. Trust me when I say, and you can research it yourself, that this is something that should never, ever be anywhere near minors. And the fact that these people are arguing that it should is absolutely criminal. And I'm not surprised that somebody tried to bring criminal charges against superintendent of that school for having this book on his shelf, because somebody has to be held to account for this sort of thing, because this is grooming of children. And any adult who writes this sort of thing or who thinks that it's okay to show this to kids in a classroom is a sick, sick person. Let's just say it how it is. This stuff really pisses me off, to be honest. And if I were a parent and I found out that my kid were being exposed to this sort of stuff behind my back in school, I would be absolutely ropeable. So I'm glad that there are parents out there like Tiffany, like Mums for Liberty, who are standing up for this absolute monstrosity. So enough venting from me today, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to watch another one, right here. Next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.
Lumberjack. Orders. Hunter.
Some call this location the most paranormal location on the planet. Others call this whole thing just a big hoax. But what is undeniably true, and frankly what makes this case so much more interesting, is that unlike the vast majority of paranormal stories and claims, this case was put to an enormous amount of scientific scrutiny. In fact, there was a decade-long study done on this case where PhDs and scientists converged on this one location and basically around the clock studied, all these claims of the paranormal that was happening in the area. And after a decade of research, the findings are pretty mind-blowing. And the case that I'm referring to is none other than the very famous Skinwalker Ranch. So the too long didn't read version of this story is you have a family that purchases a ranch out in Utah, and as soon as they move in, they start noticing some pretty bizarre things around their property. Everything from, some of their livestock going missing or being harmed. They have strange sightings in the woods of creatures and lights in the sky. They eventually report it to the news, and that news story gets picked up by a couple of other outlets. And a billionaire who is obsessed with researching the paranormal sees this story. He buys the property and installs an entire team of scientists and researchers to basically try to figure out what was happening at this ranch. And they spend 10 years studying this ranch. The outcome is, well, turns out some strange things really were happening there. Before we get started, if this type of content appeals to you, the kind of strange, dark, mysterious content delivered in a story format, well, if that appeals to you, that's what my channel's all about, and I post 3 to 4 times a week. So if that appeals to you, please gently ransack the like button and then turn on all notifications so you can get all of my content every time I upload every week. All right, on with the story. In the northeastern corner of Utah lies a 500-acre plot of land, it's all desert, where a ranch sits, and that is Skinwalker Ranch. It was built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was actually built on a piece of land that had apparently been cursed. Prior to its construction, the Navajo tribe had a feud with the Utes Native American tribe. The Utes were selling off other Native Americans that they would capture. They would sell them into slavery to the United States. And so the Navajo, who had previously lived in the area where this ranch actually was built, they were forced off their land as the Utes came in and were rounding them up and selling them into slavery. And before the Navajo left that area, they cursed the land with what's called the Skinwalker curse. The idea was they were going to torment the Utes tribe for the hardships they had inflicted on the Navajo. The Skinwalker curse, legend has it, is this curse where these witches descend on the area and take the form or wear the skin of various predatory animals in the area, namely large wolves and foxes. They inhabit those bodies and terrorize anybody in the cursed land. At some point, this ranch is actually built on the land that had apparently been cursed. It wasn't until many years later when owners of that ranch started seeing predatory animals doing some very strange things in and around their property that they did some research on the area, learned about this curse, and then before long, the nickname had stuck. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased Skinwalker Ranch. It had actually been abandoned by the previous owners for the last few years, so when they purchased it, they got it for way below market price. So they are just so excited to be moving in. They breed cattle, and so they had 500 acres to let their cattle free roam. It was like the dream purchase for this family. And so when they finally do move in, like the day they move in, they don't really care that the grass is overgrown. It looks like things are kind of in disrepair. And in fact, when they go into the homestead, the actual house on the property, they were so excited about everything that they kind of overlooked some of the strange things that they immediately noticed about the property. So they go inside, and every window has a deadbolt on it. The inside and outside of every door in the house, not just the doors leading outside, doors leading between rooms had locks, the front and back side. They noticed these big pipes that were driven into the ground at the front door and back door of the property with massive chains stringing off of them, which looked like pretty powerful guard dogs had been. They're thinking to themselves, well, this is a huge piece of property. Perhaps the previous owner was a little bit paranoid, they're kind of isolated, and so they didn't really raise the red flag when, to be honest, had I moved into a property where every single door and window had multiple locks on it, and these big guard dogs, I'd probably ask a couple questions, but you know what? Terry and Gwen are just so excited about this purchase that, again, they kind of just overlook it. So on the day that they are moving in, Terry and Gwen have some family members over to help them offload trucks and move stuff into the homestead. And it's during this process as they're moving things out of the truck into the house. And again, you got to remember that the house is situated like right in the middle of the property, and you can see in every direction basically unobstructed because it's basically open desert, with the exception of a couple areas that are basically forests. And as they're offloading some of the stuff into the house, Terry looks out at one of these tree lines and he notices this huge wolf, or what looks like a wolf, pretty well off in the distance, kind of meandering its way over towards them. But it's far enough off that this is not enough to be totally worried about it. After all, I mean, Terry was a rancher and his family were fairly rugged. They only carried weapons and they were used to, protecting their livestock from predators. So this was not a, oh my goodness, I can't believe a wolf is near us. It was more like, okay, let's make a note that there's a wolf walking towards us. And so Terry he tells his family, hey guys, just so you know, there's a wolf coming towards us right now. And the whole family is now standing near the truck and they're watching this wolf. And Terry recalls as he's staring out watching this wolf, it's kind of almost walking in like a snake, like a serpentine path towards them from hundreds of yards out. It's still quite a ways out. Terry notices that there was a fence that was out where this wolf is. And the fence was pretty big, and the spaces between posts were about 6 feet. When he had a good look at the wolf next to the fence, he could tell that the wolf was at least 6 feet long. And he was thinking, are my eyes playing a trick on me? Like, that's an enormous wolf. That's the biggest wolf I've ever seen. But the wolf wasn't acting angry or aggressive. It was just kind of skulking its way towards them, very nonchalant, broad daylight. And at some point, Terry and the family, they're standing behind the truck, and Terry said that they all had this feeling that the wolf was not going to harm them. And the wolf got about 100 yards away, and Terry and his family are transfixed. And he even said he didn't understand why they weren't scared or why they weren't running away or shooting at it or something, but they just made it. All of them are just standing there watching this wolf that's massive. And the wolf is wagging its tail and acting like a domesticated dog. The wolf comes over and goes up near Terry's father, who's there helping unload some of the gear they had.
Yes.
And Terry's father just kind of reflexively reaches out to start petting this petting right up at his head level, this massive wolf. And the wolf just acts like a domesticated dog and kind of rubs against his hand and then starts walking away from him, wagging its tail and not doing anything, not causing them any harm, not snarling, not growling, nothing. But just as nonchalantly as it walked over them, it walks over to where they had a pen with a couple of cows and calves inside of this pen. And one of the calves had its head through the post that was keeping them in this cage, just kind of watching this wolf. And the wolf notices it and in an instant jumps over to this calf and immediately has the whole head of the calf in its jaws, just trying to rip it out of the cage. But it can't get it to squeeze through the cage. And so all of a sudden, like Terry and his family are broken out of this weird trance. And Terry starts firing shots at the wolf. It strikes the wolf and has no impact. They run over, they start hitting it with the back end of an axe. They're trying to get this thing off of the calf because their livestock, that was their livelihood. And these are rugged people, and so they're trying to fight to save their property, to save their cows. And the wolf is just totally unaffected. It's not trying to attack Terry or his son that are trying to get rid of it. The wolf is just trying to attack the cow, but it won't let go. And finally, it just kind of gives up on the calf, starts kind of retreating. Terry ends up getting his rifle, a high-powered rifle, and takes a shot at the wolf one more time. But again, it just has no impact on the wolf. And the wolf just, at some point, just is, I guess, bored, turns around and kind of trots off into the woods. After they kind of were brought out of that initial trance, that they remembered this horrible smell, this like foul, almost chemical smell that just permeated the whole area after the wolf was there. Terry and his son, they decided to go track this wolf because now there's this massive predator that's going to make owning cattle extremely difficult, and so they would have to go deal with this predator. And so instead of retreating into the house, they grab their weapons and they track the wolf that's now jogged off into the forest. And they make it to an area in the forest where the ground is very muddy and sodden. And Terry could easily make out these footprints that just suddenly stopped. And they just couldn't make sense of it. And so they went back to the house and they told their family, like, we tracked it into the woods. There's no blood trail. There's nothing. It just walked in and vanished. So this is day one of being at this ranch, and they're all on edge now. The whole family is on edge. They really don't know what to make of that wolf. the sheer size of it, the fact that it was totally unaffected by being shot multiple times. There's real concern over their own livelihood because they keep cattle and they're only going to have more that are going to be out in these pens. And there are wolves that are 3 times the size of a normal wolf that are walking around killing cattle. That's a big problem if you own cattle. And so they're on edge, and they're all in a way trying almost not to talk about how crazy and how bizarre that encounter with the wolf was. They're just like, they're treating it like it's just a normal predator problem. Like, man, we gotta get those wolves, we gotta protect our cattle. But in the back of everybody's minds, they're like, something very strange is happening here. Gwen, she was having some other very strange things that were happening to her that she was not tying to the wolf thing. She was just noticing a couple of distinct things that were happening to her that made her think that she actually had a very real, like, medical problem. She had, like, you know, true memory issues. Because 2 things happened. One, in that first week, she had gone to the grocery store, and when she came back, she put the groceries away, and then she left to go to the other room, and when she came back, all the groceries were now back in the bags. And so for like 20 minutes, she's just sitting there like dumbfounded with, did I put the groceries away? Same day, she goes to take a shower, and she hangs her towel in the bathroom like anyone would, and she takes a shower, and then when she gets out, the towel's missing. And she's like, huh. She gets another towel and she towels off, and then she finds the towel hanging up in a closet on the other side of the house. And so between the groceries and the towel, she's like, is there something wrong with me? Am I like having a stroke? Am I having a medical issue here that I'm like literally losing my mind? And it wasn't until Terry actually had a similar experience that she started to wonder if this had to do with maybe that strangeness with the wolf, that maybe there's just something odd happening about this property. And it was Terry, in that first week, he had been digging holes for a new fence. And he had this big fence digging tool, about 70 pounds, that he was using to dig the holes for the fence. And so he had taken a break after making a bunch of posts for this fence. He took a break, left his fence digging tool, you know, at the last place he had dug a post, and he went in to grab a bite to eat, came back out, and his fence digger is missing. And initially, he just goes into the house and he's like, hey, you know, to his wife, to his kids, like, did you guys move my fence digger? Like, do you know what happened to it? Like, where is it? It's not out there. And they're like, no, we've been in the house the whole time. I have no idea. And so they couldn't find it. And a week goes by, and he's out patrolling his property looking for wolves, and in the tree, like well away from where he had been digging the post before, in the tree, his fence digging tool that's 70 pounds is like 70 feet in the air, strung up in this tree. So Terry comes back to the house and he tells his family about the fence digging tool being in the tree. And that's when Gwen tells Terry about her experiences with the groceries going back in the bag and a towel being moved around the house. And everybody in the family starts to really start being scared. We can't explain what's happening on this property, and we're very isolated. And what's the deal with all these locks on all the doors? I mean, they're starting to feel really concerned. Following the fence digging tool being found, Terry started to notice lights on his property. Initially, because this was the first couple of weeks they're there, he would see lights way at the far end of his property that looked like headlights, and he would think someone must have made a wrong turn that wound up on my property, and we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and they'll just leave. And so when he first started seeing these lights, that's what he assumed it was, just people making a wrong turn. But he started to see it so often that he wondered if people were illegally hunting on his property. And so one night he sees these lights on his property and he goes out to investigate. In fact, he's angry. You know, he's had all these strange things happen. His family's on edge, you know, and now he's mad and he's going to take it out on this person who's illegally hunting on his property. And he starts charging out to these lights, and he starts getting closer and closer, and he starts to realize it's not making any sound. If this was like a truck, it's not making any sound. And we're in an area where I could totally hear that if it was a vehicle, and he can't hear anything. And as he gets closer and closer, the lights start retreating from him without making a sound, and then float up into the sky and disappear. And Terry's like, what is going on here? The winter rolls around, and it's a particularly brutal winter. And one night, he couldn't account for one of his cows, and so he's out looking for this one stray cow, and he searches this whole property, and there's only one area that he hasn't searched, and it's that forest where that giant wolf had disappeared after marching in there, and they tracked it in there. And so he goes in there, and as soon as he gets to the tree line, he notices there's a bunch of footprints from what looks like a cow. And he's relieved because it's probably his. He follows it into the woods, and much like the wolf that had just disappeared in that muddy, like sodden area in the forest, in the same spot, the footprints that appeared to be this cow had also just, well, disappeared. And then over the course of the remainder of the winter, that would happen 4 more times. The animals would run away and just disappear without a trace. By the end of the winter, after all these animals have just mysteriously disappeared, Terry and his family, but Terry in particular, has really gone into full paranoia mode. He, at night, would just like stalk his own property, like hiding behind bushes with his weapon, and like hope to see what was taking his cattle. And so one night, as he's doing another fruitless search around his property, he catches out of his periphery what looks like a kind of mass of something moving around in the trees in his property. And at this point, he was kind of obscured by some shrubs and some plants. And so he kind of crouched down and looked out at the tree line. And he sees in the tree line this like strange shape kind of moving about inside of the trees. And he would describe the mass as just almost like a stealth fighter jet, but really small. And with no sound, it's hovering about 20 feet off the ground. And he's crouched down, not making sound, watching it. And it's just kind of like moving around the tree line. And it has these lights that are looked to be kind of standing around. It's just kind of moving around, it's shining these lights, these multicolored lights on the ground. And Terry moves a tiny bit to get a better angle on this thing. And he makes the tiniest of noises against the brush, just like a tiny little, barely audible sound. And this mass that's pretty far away, the lights immediately turn off, and it angles itself so it's facing directly at Terry. And Terry can feel it right away. He's heard this tiny little sound he's making, and now it's staring directly at Terry. And Terry's like terrified. And he's looking at this thing, wondering, like, oh my god, like, is it gonna come take me? Like, what is this? Is this the thing that's been taking my livestock? And he's terrified. And he's staring at it, and it just flies away. By the spring of 1995, things have gotten really, really bad for Terry and his family. Now, not only are they losing livestock inexplicably, but they're showing up. The actual cows are showing up back on their property, hours or days later, just kind of in random locations on the property, and they look like they've had surgery done, like precision cuts, and pieces of them are missing. And in addition, some very strange things are happening at the house. At night, they would see these entities walking around their property, these humanoid, they described them as having no expression, just walking around their property. And sometimes they would walk right up to the glass, put their hands on the glass and look in, but there was no face. And like Terry and his family, they had blinds down, and they would use the deadbolts on every single door and window, but they could hear them rapping at the glass, and they could hear them communicating in a language they didn't understand right outside of their house. And this became so regular that it was almost impossible to sleep. Terry's kids started performing very poorly in school because they weren't sleeping. Terry's wife, Gwen, she lost her job at the bank because she wasn't sleeping, and she was like delusional. They were all just at an absolute breaking point. Terry is now feeling totally disheartened. One night he's sitting on his porch with his rifle, and he notices out on the horizon a new phenomenon. He was used to seeing the lights on his property that would be off in the distance that would disappear, and he had previously seen that kind of like fighter jet thing that was scanning the area. Like, those were two types of lights he would see, but there was a new light he saw as he's sitting on his porch. It was almost like this orangey orb that appeared off in the distance. Since he had his rifle with a high-powered scope on it, he just lifts up his rifle and he looks through his high-powered scope and he zooms in all the way, and he can see that this orb, he describes it as a portal. That as he's looking at it, it has almost like an oval shape to it, and even though it was nighttime, in the middle of the orange orb is this blue sky. It's as if he's looking through a portal into another world where it's broad daylight and there's a sky. and he doesn't know what to make of it, but he can see that a black figure is crawling out of this portal into his property, and it looks just like the black entities that were kind of basically walking around his property at night. In addition to these figures that are crawling, like imagine that scene from The Ring where the girl crawls out of the well, but they're crawling out of this portal into his property and then scurrying away into the tree line. And he sees weird craft as well coming into his property through the portal, and then the portal shuts and disappears. Following this night with the orange portal, Terry started to notice blue orbs that he and his family would say were the worst and most terrifying thing of all of the things they experienced. And considering they had tall, featureless black humanoids peering in their windows and rapping on their windows, that's saying something, okay? So a blue orb started showing up on their property. And the way they described it, Terry and his family, was whenever the orb came near you, it gave you this extreme sense of anxiety. It was almost like it was emitting this feeling that you automatically got, where suddenly you were unbelievably anxious and terrified of the blue orb. And then as soon as it left, you would not be anxious anymore. And so one night, he's sitting on his porch like he had begun doing, and he sees this orb show up on his property. And his 3 dogs are sitting with him that see the orb, and they start growling and barking, and so he lets his dogs go, thinking maybe they can scare the thing off. And the dogs take off running away from the orb. And they chase it, and he sees the orb, Terry sees the orb, and starts to kind of retreat. And he's thinking, oh my goodness, I finally won something. My attack dogs are going to scare this orb off. He chases off into the woods, and he sees this thing, the blue orb, retreat into the woods. And then when he's thinking again that finally that's a victory for us, he hears his dogs yelping, and he's too terrified to go check it out. And so he ends up going inside and locking the doors, locking the windows like they had been, and just kind of retreating. So the next day, when the dogs hadn't returned, Terry and his son, they go out looking for the dogs in the forest. When they get out there, they get to a clearing, and they find 3 stacks of ashes in little burned out circles, as if there had been a fire previously in these 3 little spots. And it turned out it was the ashes of these 3 dogs that had gone into the woods. They had just been vaporized. Terry decides that it's time to move and he wants to sell the ranch. And so he puts the property up for sale and goes to a local news outlet. He tells them about what's happening on his property. And as fate would have it, a billionaire by the name of Robert Bigelow, who had invested millions of dollars in standing up this scientific research team, this all-star team of PhDs, specifically to research what he described as high strangeness, which really is just paranormal. Basically, he was obsessed with the paranormal and wanted to investigate the paranormal. And he had actually seen that fairly obscure story when he saw that it was up for sale. Robert Bigelow, the billionaire, saw this great opportunity to buy the piece of property and actually make it the headquarters of his own scientific research team. Not only to investigate what was happening on Skinwalker Ranch, but use it as kind of a hub to do other scientific research. So he purchases the ranch, and Terry actually, even though he did not want to spend any time at the ranch, on some level wanted to know what the research was going to show, because he was very curious about what is going on at this ranch, what's plaguing my family. So he offers to stay on like the ranch manager, because Robert Bigelow and his team are a bunch of scientists and business people. They don't have any experience in the ranch, and so they're happy to keep them. So Terry is still connected to the ranch, but at this point he sold it to Robert Bigelow. So Robert Bigelow's scientific group was called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, N-I-D-S, NIDS for short. And Bigelow had actually built the team before purchasing Skinwalker Ranch. And what he went out and did is he recruited some of the most incredible scientists and PhDs he could possibly recruit, but he didn't want people that were interested in the paranormal. He wanted people that were inherently skeptical, so that if he was ever able to prove the existence of high strangeness, that he would have the credibility in doing that. So he went out and found these incredibly skeptical and incredibly smart scientists and PhDs. And so they move into Skinwalker Ranch, and the first thing they do is they need to start doing testing to make sure that this whole, all the stories about Skinwalker Ranch coming from Terry and his family were not just some grand illusion by that family, that they could have just made it up. And so they get in there and they start running these tests. So that first year, they're running these tests, which are largely things like, okay, let's check the environment and see if there aren't any plants that are giving off spores that could be hallucinogenic that they're breathing in. Let's check their water supply and make sure there wasn't something happening in their water supply. Let's do psychological assessments of the family. Let's ask neighbors. Let's do all of our diligence to make sure it's not something environmental or psychological. And over that first year, while they're doing this research, there isn't much activity at the ranch, save a couple of instances where there were some strange lights. So that first year is fairly uneventful, but what's important is that the NIDS researchers come to a conclusion that this did not seem like a hallucination. This did not seem like a something coming from a plant or a water supply. This seemed like Terry and his family were really experiencing something odd. They just didn't know what it was. One day, Terry and actually Gwen, who was helping them, were tagging some of the new cows that had been born, putting these little tags in their ears. And so Gwen was there helping. And so Terry and Gwen, they tagged this new calf. Put a yellow tag in its ear, and they move on, and they're tagging other animals. And so for about 40 minutes, their eyes and their attention are not focused on this one calf or that one area of the ranch. They're tagging other animals, and then their dog that was with them starts growling and reacting in the direction of where this calf had been. And so Terry and Gwen turn around and they look and they don't see anything. They start walking over, and they find the calf that they were tagged about 40 minutes ago has been basically surgically dissected. All that's left of its leg and its head. And in addition, the ear where that tag was had been removed. And so they immediately call over the NIDS researchers. So the NIDS veterinarian comes over and looks at the scene and just can't make sense of it because the incision was so well done that it looked like someone with real surgical expertise had done this on an operating table. There was no sign that this was done by a predator, and there was no blood anywhere. So this prompts a massive search of the property, because in many ways, this is what the NIDS researchers are looking for, are real occurrences of something that is highly strange that they can go investigate. And so all of the researchers and everybody there begins searching the property for whoever was responsible for this dissection of the cow. And they start searching the property, and the dogs, they had all these guard dogs that were kept at each of these observation posts that they had set up around the ranch as soon as the NIDS team had moved in. They were all looking in the same direction, all four of these four observation posts, and they're all cowering in the back of their cages, all looking in the same direction. And so they start making their way towards the tree line where all these dogs are looking, and they stop short when Terry says, "I see something in the tree." So they stop their car and they're looking, and in the tree is this massive wolf, this like wolf-like humanoid that's basically perched on the tree. And Terry looks out his rifle and aims at the creature up in the tree, this huge creature, and everybody sees it. All the NIDS researchers are looking at this creature, and they're like, "Oh my God, what is that?" Terry starts firing it, and it just disappears into the woods. And so the team charges into the woods, they fan out, and they pick up a couple of tracks of this huge thing that has like this massive footprint with these huge claws. But much like the wolf that had disappeared and the cattle that had suddenly disappeared when it went into the woods, they couldn't find any traces of this thing. But they did smell this horrible stench that Terry remembered smelling and stuck with him that first day when the large wolf came over. The very first day they were moving in, it was that same smell. But they couldn't find this huge animal. So dumbfounded, the NIDS researchers just go back to the property and no one can make sense of it. And they have the footprint and they have their own eyewitness testimony, but like they couldn't make sense of how something that big could just get away. And so over the following month, they're like searching the property and looking for signs of this huge creature or anything. The only thing they noticed noticed is that the guard dogs consistently stayed in their kennels and did not want to come out. They were acting like they were kind of being hunted, and they were they were cowering quite a bit, and they were scared to go out in the open, but they couldn't find it. So it was around this time that Terry and Gwen are kind of back to doing work around the ranch, and one day they're driving off to one section of the ranch and they pass by the corral where 4 of their prized bulls were, very expensive animals that are all in this enclosure. So they drive past and they take a mental note that they're seeing these bulls in this enclosure, and they drive off to the other side of the ranch where they're doing some work, tagging animals and building fences, whatever it is they were doing. And when they come back, and they round the corner where they're first able to see that corral of bulls going, they are like, where are they? The bulls were not in the enclosure, and they weren't anywhere. And so they're panicked. They're very expensive animals. And they run over, and Terry sees that the gates to the corral are still locked. No bulls, there's no sign of struggle or anything. And it just so happens that right next to the corral was this fairly small trailer that hadn't been used in years. In fact, it was literally wired shut. It was just sitting there. And Terry, just for whatever reason, runs over and looks in one of the windows. And inside of this tiny enclosure are these 4 bulls, completely calm, all crammed into this tiny trailer. They could barely fit. They're not fighting with each other or anything. They're just calmly sitting there as if they're in some kind of a trance. And Terry yells to Gwen, like, hey, they're over here. They're right here. And it like startles the bulls out of their trance. They start panicking and kicking, and they end up getting them out of this enclosure, and it takes them hours to finally round them up and get them back in the corral. But they're unharmed. But it is almost impossible to get even one bull into that small of an enclosure. It would take hours to maybe be successful in doing that. To get 4 bulls into that enclosure was pretty much impossible. And to do it when they basically were calm after they were in there is also somewhat impossible. And it was important to note that Terry saw when he looked in the window that the only entrance to that trailer was wired shut still. It had not been undone. In fact, the cobweb in the corner where the opening basically formed on the sides of the trailer, it was still intact, like it had not opened. And it made no sense how those bulls got in there. And so the NIDS researchers come over, and they can't make sense of it either. Upon further investigation, the NIDS researchers found that the bars of the corral that held the bulls, a section of it had been highly magnetized. And so while they're doing this research, trying to figure out if magnetic fields has anything to do with the strange occurrences at the ranch, 2 of the NIDS researchers were on the outskirts of the property using their compass to look for magnetic fields, and they started smelling, they both reported smelling horrible metallic, like rotting smell that other people had reported smelling anytime they saw that large wolf. And when they started smelling it, their compass started to flitter and then pointed away from north towards wherever the smell was. And they remember thinking that they felt like they were being watched. And it went on for a few moments, and their compass didn't waver. It was aimed in the direction of the smell, and they're both on opposite sides, pointing in the same direction. And then at some point, the smell stops and they stop feeling anxious, and the north arrows go back to the way they should have been. And then one of the most terrifying of all of the paranormal occurrences that happened at Skinwalker Ranch happened at the very end of 1997. 2 NIDS researchers were up on a ridgeline overlooking the homestead. Every night it became commonplace to basically position NIDS researchers all over the property to basically be on the lookout for weird things that are happening. And these 2 researchers are up on this ridge, kind of obscured and hidden, and they see this orange orb take shape right near the homestead. And one of them had an infrared goggles, and so he looks down at the orb, and you can clearly make out that it's this oval-shaped opening that sounded an awful lot like what Terry had seen on his porch when he saw that humanoid creature crawling out of the portal into his property. Well, these 2 researchers are looking at this portal, and they see the same thing. They see this black human-like creature crawling out of this orange portal onto the ground, and it starts running up the hill towards them. And they're like frozen with fear. They start smelling that horrible, rotting, metallic smell as this big human-like creature bounds up the mountain, and they can hear the shale under its feet as it runs up, and it goes right past them. It's about 30 feet away from them. They're looking at it, and it barrels past them in a full sprint up into the mountainside. The following year, in 1998, the activity on the ranch declined significantly. All they have was the occasional strange lights here and there, but for the most part it was done. And in fact, even though NIDS remained on the property, by 2004, the research just wasn't amounting to anything, so they pulled the plug on the operation. They did have footage of the number of lights that were seen, but again, no one's going to take a picture of some random lights and say, oh, there you go, proof. You know, they demonstrated that there were, you know, magnetic fields, and they had images of these calves that would reappear after looking like they'd had surgery done to them. They had hundreds of eyewitness reports. You know, they have all this information, but none of it was really definitive proof, which was very frustrating to Robert Bigelow, to Terry and his family. And the way they described it is they felt like they were dealing with an entity or a group of entities that were just consistently one step ahead of them. That they could catch glimpses of what they were doing, but it was never enough to really understand what was happening. They never felt like they were in control. It was always clear that this entity or these entities were in control of the situation, and they never were in a good position to really record hard data or get good footage. Not to mention, this is 1998, this is the late 90s. No one just had like, you know, an iPhone and pull out and snap pictures. You had like real cameras. And so the best they could do was pictures of light and some of the animals that had been mutilated. There's been numerous books put together by some of the people that were a part of this NIDS research team, and to this day they believe that what they saw was a result of some paranormal activity. And to this day, many people believe that this is one of the most incredible instances of paranormal activity occurring. So I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, whether you think this is total fact or total hoax or somewhere in the middle. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallin416. Also, I post quite a bit on TikTok. My handle is Mr. Ballin. And that's going to do it, guys. I hope you got something out of this. And until next time, see you.
And attention, yes, to battle! For America!
The paranormal does not really have a place in the military, despite what anybody tells you. It's just not something that gets discussed. Now, I was a bit of an anomaly. I was in the Navy for 7 years. 5 of those years were spent on a SEAL team, and maybe because we were in such small teams, people had to put up with my weirdness and my interest in, you know, the strange happenings around the world. But, you know, really that was an anomaly. And I think it comes from the culture inside the military, where you have a group of people that has such a intense job that's so rooted on practical approaches to problem solving. There is no time to be theorizing about how demons and ghosts and things that are out of this world are having an impact, because we need to focus on what's happening right now in front of us. There's no space for anything else. And so when you do hear stories coming out of the military that are paranormal in nature, it isn't that you should inherently believe them, but rather you should understand that if they have come to the conclusion that this is paranormal, they have ruled out virtually everything else. And so today I'm going to share a military paranormal story that happened in Afghanistan in 2009 when 8 US Marines were stationed at this very isolated observation post in the middle of Helmand province. And some very strange things happened out there that the Marines that were there believe are still plaguing them to this day. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to play Ding Dong Ditch on the like button's house, and then also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.